In April 1861, a 54-year-old Army colonel sat in his home across the river from Washington, facing the hardest decision of his life. He was one of the most respected soldiers in the United States Army. He had just been offered command of the Union forces being raised to fight the South, and he opposed secession. He even called slavery an evil. And yet, within days, he would resign from the Army he had served for over 30 years and cast his lot with the Confederacy. His name was Robert E. Lee, and his agonizing choice tells us something profound about the tragedy of this war. Lee's story is one of the most revealing and most misunderstood of the entire Civil War, because it shows how good men of genuine honor and ability, could be drawn into a cause built on a terrible wrong. To understand the Confederacy, we have to understand Lee. So let's slow down and look closely at the choice he faced and why he made it the way he did. Robert E. Lee came from one of Virginia's most distinguished families. His father had been a hero of the Revolution. Lee himself was a model soldier, a graduate of West Point, a decorated veteran, an engineer, a man of impeccable bearing and reputation. By 1861, he was widely regarded as one of the finest officers in the entire U.S. Army. So highly was he regarded that, as the crisis came to a head, the aging Union General-in-Chief and the Lincoln administration wanted him to lead their armies. And so, in April 1861, through an intermediary, a man named Francis Blair, acting on behalf of the government, Lee was offered command of the main Union army being raised to suppress the rebellion. Think about that. The very army that would fight the Confederacy was offered to Robert E. Lee. It was the pinnacle of a soldier's career, the chance to lead the forces of the United States. And Lee turned it down. To understand why, we have to understand the man's divided heart. Here is the crucial and complicated truth. Lee did not personally support secession. He thought it was a mistake, even unconstitutional. He had written that he could anticipate no greater calamity than the dissolution of the Union, and that he would sacrifice everything but honor to preserve it. And on slavery, his views were tangled. In a well-known letter from 1856, Lee had actually called slavery a moral and political evil. So here was a man who opposed secession and called slavery an evil, being offered command of the Union Army. Why then did he refuse it? The answer, in Lee's own mind, came down to one word: loyalty. But not loyalty to the Union, and not loyalty to the Confederacy. Loyalty to Virginia, to his home, his state, his people. In that era, especially in the South, many people felt their deepest allegiance was to their state, not to the federal nation. Lee thought of himself, first and foremost, as a Virginian. And when Virginia seceded and joined the Confederacy, Lee felt he simply could not take up arms against his own state, his own family, his own home. He agonized over it. By his own account, he paced through the night, wrestling with the decision. He reportedly said that he could not raise his hand against his relatives, his children, his home. Though he loved the Union and opposed secession, he concluded that his duty lay with Virginia, come what may. And so, when Virginia left the Union, Lee resigned his commission in the United States Army, the army he had served for 32 years, and offered his sword to his native state. It is one of history's great tragic ironies. The man who would become the greatest general of the Confederacy, the very symbol of the Southern cause, did not fight primarily to defend slavery, which he called an evil, nor even out of belief in secession, which he opposed. He fought out of a sense of loyalty and duty to Virginia. His was a choice of the heart over the head, of home over nation, and it would make him the military soul of a cause whose foundation he claimed to find troubling. Now, we must be careful and honest here, because Lee's reputation has been the subject of myth-making for over a century. While Lee called slavery an evil in the abstract, he was no abolitionist. He himself was connected to slaveholding. He oversaw enslaved people, and his views on race were those of a Southern aristocrat of his time. He did not believe in racial equality, and he believed emancipation, if it came at all, should be left to God's distant timing, not to political action. So we should not paint Lee as a secret opponent of slavery. He was a man of his class and his region, with all its profound blind spots. But understanding the genuine complexity of his choice helps us understand the Confederacy itself and the deep tragedy of the war. Because Lee's dilemma was, in a sense, the South's dilemma writ large. Many Southerners who fought were not wealthy slaveholders. They fought, as Lee did, out of loyalty to their states, their homes, their communities, and a sense that they were defending their land against an invading enemy. The cause was rooted in slavery, but the motives of individual men were often more personal: home, honor, and kin. This is the key to understanding how the Confederacy could field such determined, ferocious armies, even among men who owned no slaves. To the ordinary Southern soldier, the war often did not feel like a fight to preserve slavery. It felt like a fight to defend his home and family against Northern armies marching into his state. "We fight because you are down here," a captured Confederate is said to have told a Union soldier who asked why he was fighting. That sense of defending hearth and home, of repelling an invader, was a powerful motivator. So when the war came, Lee took command of Virginia's forces and soon became one of the Confederacy's leading generals, and eventually its most important. His skill, his audacity, and his ability to inspire devotion would make him a legend, and would keep the outmatched Confederacy in the fight far longer than anyone expected. The South had found its champion, and the man offered the Union Army would now become its most dangerous foe. Meanwhile, the broader Confederate war effort was taking shape, fueled by an enormous surge of Southern patriotism and confidence. After Fort Sumter and the secession of Virginia and other Upper South states, young men flocked to enlist by the tens of thousands, eager to defend their new nation. There was a romantic, almost festive spirit in the early days, a conviction that one brave Southerner could whip 10 Yankees, that the war would be short and glorious, and that Southern independence was assured. And the South had real reasons for confidence, despite its disadvantages. We've noted that the North had more people, more factories, more resources. But the South had advantages of its own. It was fighting a defensive war on its own ground it knew intimately. And defense is easier than attack. It only had to survive, to outlast the North's will not to conquer anyone. Its soldiers were often skilled horsemen and marksmen from a rural society. And it had, in men like Lee, some of the finest military commanders in the nation. The South also pinned great hopes on what was called King Cotton diplomacy. The idea was that Britain and France depended so heavily on Southern cotton for their textile industries that they would be forced to recognize and support the Confederacy just to keep the cotton flowing. The South believed cotton was a weapon, one that would draw the European powers to its side. It was a serious miscalculation, as we'll see, but at the start, it gave Southerners confidence that they would not fight alone. There was, however, no escaping the underlying imbalance. The South was a largely agricultural society with limited industry. It would struggle to produce its own weapons, ammunition, railroads, and supplies. It had a smaller population to draw soldiers from, made smaller still by the fact that a huge portion of its people were the very enslaved black population it would never arm, and who, in fact, longed for the Union's victory. These weaknesses would tell over time. But in 1861, the South's confidence ran high, and its early performance would seem to justify it. So as the Confederacy went to war, it did so with a potent mix of advantages and illusions. It had brilliant generals, a defensive position, fighting spirit, and the conviction that it was defending its homeland and its liberty. It also had deep structural weaknesses, and a cause rotten at its core. The story of the next 2 years would be the story of how the South's advantages allowed it to win victory after victory, even as its fundamental weaknesses slowly, inexorably caught up with it. And at the center of that story would stand Robert E. Lee, the reluctant Confederate, the man who chose Virginia over the Union, the man who would lead his ragged, outnumbered army to a series of stunning triumphs that astonished the world, and who would become the enduring symbol of both the brilliance and the tragedy of the Southern cause. His choice in April 1861 set the course not only of his own life, but of the war itself. Let's reflect finally on what Lee's agony teaches us. It reminds us that history is rarely a simple tale of villains. Lee was, by many measures, an honorable and gifted man who made a fateful choice out of loyalty and duty as he understood them. And yet that choice placed his enormous talents in the service of a cause whose foundation was human bondage. Good men can serve terrible causes, often without fully facing what they are serving. That is part of the deep tragedy of the Confederacy, and a sobering lesson for any age. Lee chose his state over his nation, his loyalty over his own stated misgivings about slavery and secession. And in doing so, he became the indispensable soldier of the Confederacy. Next time, from the Southern perspective, we'll see that soldier go to work as the outnumbered, under-equipped armies of the South stun the North with victory after victory, and the Confederacy rises, against all odds, to the very peak of its hopes. The story of how the South was winning the war is where we turn next.